I'm going to first present a little bit of an outline. So this is in this ongoing dissertation that I'm working on my field work in Lebanon. I made it to different Palestinian refugee camps. One was called the Baye, it was a Christian Palestinian refugee camp, whereas the other one is a Sunni Palestinian refugee camp, which is called Exiled. And I'm going to be just presenting a little bit of the outline of what I think I can be going, like what I'm going to head to in this presentation. That it will be something between one and two, or perhaps one or two, probably two chapters of my dissertation. So first of all, I would present right now the earliest Palestinian settlement in Lebanon, pointing out to differences in Exiled and Baye. So I'm going to be using some kind of oral history that I collected in the two camps. I'm not going to be talking too much about, the whole thing about Palestinians migrating to Lebanon, but I'm going to be concentrating much more on what happened, how they migrated to these two different settings. Now, that is going to be done especially so I can talk about later a little bit how the socialization processes that they had into different settings affect them very differently, and two different ideas of identity and different social practices emerged pretty much out of these two different socialization processes that they were subjected to, or they chose to took on in these two different settings. So, as I didn't have too much time to prepare to you, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to do a boring reading in here. But the theme is not boring, and the story is not boring, though I hope that I'm not going to make it too boring by reading it to you. So, just to start with, in June of 1946 to May 1948, around like 110,000 Palestinian refugees went to settle in Lebanon, and most of those, by the way, came from Galilee, so it's called Exiled in Arabic, okay? And the coastal cities like Jaffa, Haifa, and Akka. This was facilitated by they chose to migrate to Lebanon, especially because the migration was facilitated both by land routes and sea routes, but also because many of them had already connections with Lebanon. Some of those are going to be explored in here. So I'm going to be naming somebody in here MD, just not to use his proper name, of course. He's a first-generation resident of Exiled, or Welvet, as UNRWA names it. Exiled refugee camp, located just a couple miles away from the main entrance of Baalbek in the Lebanese Bekaa Valley. At times, MD would tell me that he was from the main port city of Haifa, in what he still calls Palestine, of course. But whenever he wanted to be more precise, though, he would mention he comes from Shifa Ahmed, a village located just some 25 miles away from today's Israeli port city. There were Christians, Jews, and Sunni Muslims in Shifa Ahmed, as he remembers it. He himself is a Sunni Muslim, as all the rest of Exiled refugees. Some of his former village neighbors took different routes and ended up in different places in the Middle East. A few would remain in the village or elsewhere in what became Israel, particularly Haifa, as some would make agreements with the Zionists. This path was chosen mainly by the Druze community, who tended to act in a coordinated way and led by its political leadership, and struck deals with the newborn Israeli government and armed forces. As a result, today the Druze community of Israel enjoy many privileges, as for example, they serve the army, the Israeli army. Almost all the Christian and Muslims were displaced. Most of them would flee to the West Bank or to Lebanon and become refugees. People from other parts of Palestine fled to different places. People from the south tended to flee to Gaza Strip and Egypt. People from the east tended to flee to the West Bank or Jordan. And people from the center regions tended to go to Jordan or to Syria, along with some inhabitants of the north. Those Christians and Muslims from Shifa Ahmed who ended up in Lebanon tended to join neighbors or kin in one of the sites where the refugees were gathering. Different groups of ex-Shifa Ahmed dwellers went to different places in Lebanon too. MD remembers that although Palestinian uproots were frequent were frequent even before the establishment of the Israeli state and after the Nakba, the catastrophes, as the Palestinians called events around and following the 1948 war. The unorganized resistance was made by the Jeish al-Inqadh, the Salvation Army as they call it, which was an army made of Arabs from Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. And, well, from Shifa Amar, he fled to Bin Shibayl in South Lebanon in company of some of his relatives and some of his neighbors. There was nothing, no hospital, no nothing, he remembers. He suffered from the cold, as he had no clothes or blankets to protect from the winter. There he stayed only for 2 months, deciding to move to Anja, located in the Bekaa Valley, some 50 kilometers away from Beirut, on the Beirut-Damascus road, close to the Mazna crossing. For those who know, that's the border between Lebanon and the most important border between Lebanon and Syria, linking Beirut to Damascus. With a group, so you went over there with a group of Palestinian refugees stationed in Bin Shibayl, which is in the very south of Lebanon, right? The reason behind this decision to move to Anja was the fact that he heard there were some unoccupied houses in that village. Once there, he discovered that although there were indeed some empty houses, the village was the site of a large group of Armenian refugees. During our conversation, we did not remember if the Armenians were there by chance or if they were settled there by the Lebanese authorities. As it turns out, though, it is known that about 5,000 Armenians coming from Turkey were settled in Anja already in 1939 by the French Navy. At about September 1948, clashes erupted between the Armenians and the Palestinian refugee groups. He did also not remember exactly why these clashes erupted, but it had to do with the occupation of the empty houses. The clashes took significant proportions. The roads around Anja were closed because of the clashes, and the Lebanese authorities drove the Palestinian refugees away from the Armenian settlement. According to MD, everyone went where they thought it would be the best. Again, neighbors or kin tended to go together. He and his group decided to go to another Palestinian irregular settlement in the Bekaa Valley, known by the name of Khor. UNRWA did not exist at that time, and the only existing Musaadat is, the social work institution. During the first year of the Nakba, was the one headed by the Grand Mufti of Palestine, Haj Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, who was a very controversial man who, for example, sided with the Germans and went to live in Germany, serving Hitler to get rid of the Jews. The fact that MIT did not remember the International Red Cross at this moment, but remember them moments after, can be seen as both due to the fact that the Red Cross did not work with all the refugee groups coming into Lebanon indeed, or due to the fact that Haj Amin's charisma, despite his polemic character, occupied a central position in MD's memory. On the other hand, as it is noted in the by the Palestinian NGO Exiled, led by the veteran Salah, that serves, his NGO serves as a hub for all the Palestinian NGOs in Lebanon. Therefore, they kind of know everything about the web that is formed and they kind of control it. From 1948 to 1950, the International Red Cross was the main organization that assisted Palestinian refugees, providing them with tents, clothes, water containers, and food. Meanwhile, other Palestinian refugees who had also been in Anja prior to the group's explosion joined other Palestinian refugees in a similar situation and settled in a French barracks close to the main entrance of Baalbek. The French barracks was named after the general that once commanded the battalion stationed in the Bekaa Valley, General Weevil. Due to the barracks' disuse following Lebanese independence, in MD's words, since the soldiers were just using the barak site, as they call it, the barracks, just for relaxing, in 1948, French authorities took in some Palestinian refugees. Many of those who left Anja with MD went straight to join other Palestinian refugees in the Weevil barracks. And in 1952, UNRWA transformed the site into a Palestinian refugee camp. Although Weevil is not the official name of the camp, it is still the official name of the camp for the UNRWA and for the Lebanese authorities. Its dwellers, most of them coming from Galilee, named the camp Al-Jalil. UNRWA, for those who know, is the United Nations Relief and Work Agencies for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. As MD told me, in contrast to most of the other Palestinian refugee camps created in Lebanon, Al-Jalil was not a rich man's land, donated or sold to UNRWA, but government property prior to the establishment of the camp. According to him, UNRWA was able to buy the land from these rich people or to rent it from the Lebanese government due to money coming from all over the world to support Resolution 194. That's the imagery that he has in his mind. Resolution 194 was the one which talked about the right of return for the Palestinian refugees, was made by the UN in 1949. As Horo did not have any school and was close to Al Jalil, Horo young refugees at school age would go to school at the newly built UNRWA school in Al Jalil refugee camp. Many were those Horo inhabitants who increasingly started to build bonds with Al Jalil community. MD did not mention at the time of my interview with him anything about reasons behind the transformation of the French barracks into a refugee camp for Palestinians. But the deal came as part of the armistice negotiated in 1949 between Lebanon and Israel, by which Lebanon would refrain from selling the Palestinians close to the Israeli border. MD's stay in Horo did not last many years though, as the site was taken back by the Lebanese army, in part due to pressures from the Kataib, the Maronite Christian party founded in the 1930s, that up to the beginning of the Lebanese civil war was the hegemonic political force in Lebanon, and they were very much anti-Palestinians. He left Horo with most of his inhabitants, only this time to be settled in what was in the 1930s another site created by the French authorities to receive Armenian refugees. The site was called Rashidiyeh. Rashidiyeh is until today the southernmost Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, 5 kilometers south of the Lebanese city of Sur, Tyre, and only some 15 kilometers away from the Israeli border. From information I gathered from other Palestinian refugees, I learned that adding to the original Rashidiyeh site in 1963, the new camp was specially created to receive the families coming from Horo and from Al-Buz, another Palestinian refugee camp. They were excavating some Roman ruins in there, so they brought them to Rashidiyeh too. So Rashidiyeh was this kind of hub camp where everybody would go to, and from there go into different places. But it was just 15 kilometers away from the Israeli border. MD would also not remain in Rashidiyeh for too long, and after some months he was transferred to the Red Cross, with the Red Cross to Al Jalil refugee camp, where he met other former Horo inhabitants, as well as other Palestinian refugees coming from different villages of Palestine, and previously gathered in different sites around Lebanon. OMD's journey lasted years, and he was finally set in Al Jalil refugee camp already in 1964, where he lives up until today in the same apartment building that once used to serve the French soldiers. And that following his coming to Rashidiyeh, he then occupied as soon as he first got to the camp. Among the most important things he remembers about the early days in the camp is the fact that the Lebanese erected a Hajiz checkpoint at the entrance of the camp. And the entrance was only allowed for the refugees themselves and for those allowed by the Lebanese government and UNRWA themselves. Proud, MD told me that in 1968 then, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, finally took over the checkpoint. As a consequence of the diversity of these people then forming the Al Jalil refugee community, MD remembers that at the beginning, many problems arose until the deepest divides were at least partially bridged. Even though 100% of Al Jalil population was Sunni Muslim, Al Jalil Palestinian camp here, not Al Jalil Galilee in Palestine, the camp, there was a large economic and cultural gap between what MD called those who used pantalon, meaning pants in Arabic, and those who used jalabi, the traditional cloth that you use, the long dress, meaning that those who came from the cities and those who came from the countryside. As a third category, there were those who were nomads, the Badawi, right, the Bedouins, some of which tended to circulate throughout the Near East and happened to be settled in Palestine in 1948. Another old man from Al Jalil Palestinian refugee camp mentioned having lived in Horo until the 1960s and then joined the group that went to Rashidiyeh and finally Al Jalil. He could remember that in the beginning they would live up to 15 people at a time in the same lodge. He remembers that relations with the Lebanese around him were all around good when he settled in Lebanon. There were some of those were not really nice, as he said, and some of those would be really nice, depending on the case, although relations with the Lebanese government were already very much severed. Another old man, this time a resident of Shatila Palestinian refugee camp I met during my field research because he happens to be For those who know, read the first chapter that I'm talking about, Ayman's father, the young man who used the French soccer team T-shirt, told me that he also used to live in Horo, but instead of going to Rashidiyya, he left much before to Shatila, as chances to get a job were much better due to the fact that Shatila was located in the southern outskirts of Beirut, where demand for cheap seasonal work was always needed. He too went to school in Al-Jalil then, and still had some friends in Al-Jalil camp, despite the many decades he left the area. Managing to escape the Sabra Shatila massacre in 1982, following the departure of the PLO from Lebanon, this massacre was led by the Quwat al-Lubnani, the Lebanese forces, another Christian party that is pretty much anti-Palestinian, is an offshoot, in fact, of Qatar, but more radical. In cooperation with the Israeli army, the Shatila old man went to live in Mar El-Yaz, another Palestinian refugee camp located in the south and western area of Beirut. Okay? One of the reasons he went to live in the camp was because some of his relatives were living in there. At that time, he was a supporter of the Jabha Shabiyyah, which means the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP. Okay? And as it turns out, Mar El-Yaz was one of Lebanon's PFLP strongholds, as the camp was originally created by UNRWA to accommodate Christian Palestinian refugee camps. And those were the Christian Palestinian refugees were those among the most supporters of the Jabha Shabiyyah, because it was communist, because it was anti-religious, it was not a Muslim group. Due to the Christian Palestinian relative facility vis-a-vis its Muslim counterpart to immigrate to Europe, America, Canada, or Australia, and due to the fact that many of them took Lebanese citizenship, Mar El-Yaz camp, by the time of the Lebanese Civil War, was being emptied of its Christian population and filled with a new Sunni component. Until today, there are some Christian families living in Mar El-Yaz, although the striking majority of the camp is non-Muslim. Also, until today, PFLP enjoys large support in the camp, a fact that can be attributed both to the Palestinian political bargains, as much as that, as what an interview with me, Dr. Anis Sayer, he himself, a Palestinian Christian refugee, very much active in Lebanon despite his old age, attributed to a possible compromise between the different religious groups and the large number of Christian shuhada, martyrs, buried in Mar El-Yaz soil. So, because of his father's choice, Ayman was taken away from Shatila's ruins to be raised at a tender age in Mar El-Yaz camp, only to return to Shatila when the rebuilding of the camp was permitted. He too thought of himself as a communist, and by the time I used to go to his place in Shatila during my field research, he had added Che Guevara posters on the wall of his and his brothers from all around the place. Then, I'm going to be talking now about the other camp, a story about the other camp. I can understand why people do not know about Bayy, because in Bayy they are Christians, answered me Dr. Anis Sayer, as soon as I mentioned how it was for me to find somebody who would vouch me. It was difficult to find somebody who would vouch my interest in the Bayy Palestinian refugee camp. When I decided to leave Al-Jalil refugee camp for Bayy to start the second part of my field research. When in field work, I chose to interview Dr. Anis Sayer because of his good connections with the Bayy residents. Most Bayy refugees came from a village in the very Palestinian and a village on the very Palestinian and today Israeli border with Lebanon called Al-Bassa. The closest village on that side to Nakura on the Lebanese side of the border. And Dr. Sayer himself, the word to be Shia was to be Lebanese. The Palestinian Shia who got Lebanese citizenship were all from Kurasaba, the 7 villages as they're known, which according to Dr. Sayer's memory were in fact about 21 or 23. When asked if he would agree with the cultural assumption that all Shia in Palestine were in fact Lebanese, Dr. Sayer told me that he thinks the government, were right. That the Palestinians, that they were Palestinians and Lebanese at the same time. Ikeri, an old man from Al-Bassa, that is part of Al-Jalil, the Jal al-Nakba generation that lived in the 1948 events, as it is known by the Palestinians, told me how at first he got to the Bayy camp. According to his story, following 1948 events in Palestine, he first settled Rashidiyya among other Palestinian refugees, Muslims and Christians, coming from the cities or from the Dea, the villages. It was only after about 3 years that he moved to the Baye al-Tahed, so the Baye, the lower Baye as they call. It was only after 3 years that he moved to the Baye al-Tahed. And in his idea, in his memory, that was to avoid problems. Avoid problems with whom? With the Muslim community in Rashidiyya, of course. Other Jal al-Nakba, the Baye residents, in other occasions, told me that the reason why some Christian Palestinians went from Rashidiyya to the Baye was because a Lebanese priest invited them to do so. The reasons behind that invitation would mainly be, in their general point of view, the protection of the Christian Palestinian community. The area around Baye was still largely inhabited, although Christian Lebanese businessmen were developing the area for rural production. The Palestinians would have certain seasonal labor there. Although not part of the old man's discourse, it is widely known that it was a common practice among Lebanese before 1967, Christian or Muslim, in Beirut or elsewhere, to hire the Palestinians to work, as they were willing to work for half of the salary that even the Shia would work for. The Shia were the so far poorest community in Lebanon. Of course, the ones who would receive less as payment. As the Christian population tended to maintain its village bonds when they came to Lebanon and already chose to live amongst other Christians, most in Al-Bassa itself, most of them accepted the invitation to live in the Baye, in what they were joined by some relatives and some other Christians from other villages. E.K. noticed, though, that to here at Baye, since the beginning, there were just Christians. Some other Christians went also, for different reasons, to Jisr al-Basha or Mar Elias. UNRWA took up the gathering only in 1956, renting it from 99 years and making of it a Christian Palestinian refugee camp along with Mar Elias. Jisr al-Basha had also a Muslim component, but after its destruction in 1976, after the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War, in the same way that Tel Azata and Karantina were also destroyed, it kind of lost the camp doesn't exist anymore. It is still a gathering for Palestinian refugees, and most of those who live in there are Christians, and it's very close to the Baye, in fact. E.K. remembers that the harsh conditions they lived in the beginning. After abandoning the tents, they started to live in wooden houses with roofs made of zinc, and there were no private bathrooms, only what they called mushtarak, the shared ones. Only after many years and following the camp's first conflict, they moved to the Baye, upper Baye, as they were preparing the land for the settlement. Because of that, E.K. points out, no, not everybody in the Baye was from 1948, and more to the point, not everybody in the Baye was even Palestinian at all. So, in his words, these were all Kul Gharib, meaning all strangers. Like in this case, they were all Lebanese Christians, but strangers, not Palestinians, that came to live in the camp because it was safe during the Lebanese Civil War. Although not so much accusative at first as some others in the Baye would be when talking about this issue, he just mentioned that some of them would go to live in the Palestinian refugee camp in 1976 because of Qatar. As already pointed out, 1976 was a harsh year for the Palestinian refugee camps located around East Beirut, that means a Christian-dominated area of the city. As, for example, it was in the same year that Jisr al-Basha and Tal Zata and Karantina, but also Anaba and the Guana camps were all destroyed. As E.K. recounts, there were mainly 3 conflicts in the Baye that shaped the camp's life and relations with the Lebanese. The first one was in 1973, the other in 1975, and the last one already in 1991. This last one after the Taif agreement that brought the end to the Civil War. The conflict of 1973 was one between the Palestinians in the Baye and the Lebanese army, as the Lebanese army mounted a checkpoint below the Baye camp in the Autostrada, as they call it, the road linking Beirut to Tripoli in the north, and started to ask for everyone entering towards the camp for identity card. All of those who were recognized as Palestinians would be stopped and interrogated. Many were able to avoid the problems at first, though, as they passed as Lebanese. In the identity card of many who got Lebanese nationality, it was not written Palestinian, as they were already born in Lebanon. E.K. complemented that from these, one could only know if he's Palestinian, if he speaks about it, or from the accent. But many know how to emulate the Palestinian accent for them, as many were already born in here. But still, others who were recognized Palestinians were beaten, and many others were jailed. The Palestinians who were in the Bay went down with their Kalashnikovs, as in the Bay, it was just a few Kalashnikovs in the end, because in the Bay was just a few PLO militants at that time. There was never, in fact, many PLO. There were just two military groups in the Bay, and PLO who had like a couple of militants, and then the PFLP who had a couple more. So it wasn't really, the camp was demilitarized already. It was not even militarized to be demilitarized. So as a result, the conflict severed the relationship between the Bay residents and the Lebanese Christians surrounding them even further. But then from January 1976 to 14 January 1976, the Bay was under siege due to Kataib's effort to control the camp, as a civil war had already erupted, triggered by the Aina Rumene event, the famous bus that was that some guys from Kataib just killed about 20-something to 30-something, I don't remember exactly the number, Palestinians going out of the bus, the event that triggered the Lebanese civil war. So when the Kataib and the Palestinians were on different sides of the conflict, so Kataib, as the camp was located in a Christian area, Kataib, first thing that they did was to control the camp. There was not too much resistance because, as EK says, the camp was small. It did not have many PLO people. On the aftermath, the camp was finally occupied by force by Kataib militias, and about 5 offices were installed in different points of the camp. As EK recalls, many Kataib militants took over Palestinian houses, took their money, and used them to fuel and carry sandbags to their front positions in East Beirut. As he told me, nobody did anything, and as it was not prohibited to do so, Makan Fidauli, there was no government, he says, there was no prohibition. Everything was allowed. With the end of the war, the Lebanese army, led by General Michel Aoun, started his war of liberation, intended to get rid of all Lebanese militias. What was a precondition to the transition of the military rule to the establishment of a civil Lebanese government. One of the army's main battles was with the Kataib, that accused Aoun of usurping the power, and that he did not want to see their position, and they ended up not wanting to see their position to the army general. As it turns out, the Kataib territory border with that of Aoun's territory was exactly Bay. It was a very important military strategic position, since the camp was located on a hill overlooking the road linking Beirut to Tripoli. In 1981, the Lebanese army then shelled the Bay. This time, Palestinian refugees in the Bay were not the cause of the conflict, but only caught in the crossfire. Following the army's success, in 1991 alone, according to UNRWA data, 25% of the Bay turned into rebels. Many of the Lebanese who were seeking shelter from the war, as well as many of those who came with Kataib, are still living in the Bay. Others sold their properties to other Lebanese who now reside in the camp. Now, I just want to wrap this presentation of this data and make some sense out of it right now. It's interesting to notice that Lebanon's primary impact on the Palestinians was to scale up Palestinian class and sectarian divide and turn it into a political force. The original setting of the Palestinian refugee camps, as Rosemary said, she's not the wife of Ani Saif, Dr. Ani Saif, but she's an anthropologist that has been working with Palestinian refugees for over 50 years now. So she's the sole authority in the subject. She says that the original setting of the camps was a product of several factors. An official zoning policy made itself felt through Lebanese army moves to reduce the number of refugees in the south, especially near the border, and this was done by transfer to other areas, mainly the Bekaa, as we've seen in Jalil, and by declaring the border a military zone, prohibiting civilian access. The second way that became gradually apparent was to prevent the refugee build-up around Beirut. Prohibition of permanent housing and restrictions on supplies were early signs of this policy towards the Beirut camps. Lebanon's sectarian map and the needs of its economy also played a role in the choice of the campsites. The bulk of the refugees remained in the mainly agricultural areas near Tyre, Nabatea, Tripoli, and Baalbek. But also, she doesn't add in here, but we've seen that also the Bahia is the same case, where they provide seasonal agricultural labor. Camps were also set up near predominantly Muslim urban areas, like Ain al-Halwi near Sidon, or Bedawi near Tripoli, or Bush al-Barajni in Beirut's southern suburbs, where they formed a cheap labor pool for public and private construction. Whenever they could manage to, the Palestinians migrate to urban camps because of the better chance they offer employment and education, and the easiest climate, as we've seen also in the stories that I presented here. From the camp's inhabitants' perspective, the closest layers of people around them were the Lebanese state, usually the army, and the refugee management apparatus, laws, ministries, UNRWA, etc. Other Palestinians then, other camps or gatherings or individuals, came just as a second layer. So each camp was situated in a specific regional, economic, and social setting, with neighbors who had been friendly or hostile depending on the historical moment and degree of sectarian mobilization. The sectarian imprint of the Lebanese society shaped both Lebanon's integration of the refugees as well as the effect they would have in Lebanon politics. Preparations for an armed struggle, including the opening of the military camps for Palestinians in many Arab countries, affected life in the Lebanon refugee camps. In the early 1960s, weapons began to flow, for example. And in 1965, Fatah carried out his first announced military operation, enthusiastically received in the camps. PLO was created in 1964, and they went to Lebanon in 1970. PLO was organized by Shihab, the president of Lebanon at the time, in 1958 to 1964, at the level of the camp unions. Nonetheless, always fought in the political arena. The defeat of the Arab armies in 1967 might not have been so catastrophic for the Palestinians as it seems, at least because they were freed from the Arab tutelage for the first time. So that means that in the camps in Lebanon, people could arm themselves and PLO could decide its own fate. President Shihab installed the Army Intelligence Bureau directly in every camp, but a later series of camp uprisings supported by the Lebanese national movement that was led by Kamal Jumblat at the time forced the Lebanese authorities to withdraw, leaving the camps to be controlled by the Kifah Musleh, as they say, the armed struggle, in 1969. This armed struggle then was mainly composed by armies from different Arab countries, but it was soon to be left, the leadership of the resistance movement was soon to be left by PLO. Now, the thing is that when PLO went to the camps in Lebanon, they created an amazing sort of change into popular culture and social structure in the camps. So, first of all, there was this Palestinian cultural revivalism. It was a mainly middle-class phenomenon that was linked historically to PLO, but not only contained by it, but, for example, that classes and everything, people would be talking about Palestine as a whole differently from what we've seen so far, when people would think about Palestine as their own village, small village, and they would eat different things and they would think about different things. Now the Palestinian resistance movement was creating this new ideology in there, this new identity. With that, they would also bring, by the armed struggle, a new sort of discourse, a new sorts of social practices, and social organization as well. So they would organize everybody into committees and so on and so forth. And the camps, the tempo of the camps would also change a lot. So you started to have all this ihtifal, which is like celebrations, or you're gonna have manifestations, muzahara, or you're gonna have many things that started to be part of the Palestinian daily life in the camps. Then the PLO had to withdraw from Lebanon in 1982, and that was another moment where they kind of got confused. things started to being reframed at that time. Now, what is interesting to notice in here, first of all, is that every camp, because of this, when PLO left Lebanon, had a totally different, was found itself in a very different context in Lebanon. So, for example, we had Lebanon located in a Christian area, facing all the wars that it faced after 82, and even before 82 already. And then you have a Jalil camp located in the Bekaa Valley, which had a totally different trajectory. The thing is that the Bahia, for example, wasn't militarized since the beginning because its population already identified themselves with Lebanon since the beginning, and it wasn't socialized in the same institutional process that other camps were. First of all, by UNRWA and PLO, after all, Bahia had a totally different story. It was socialized already in a mixed way of being crushed by the Lebanese around them and being accepted at the same time, because after all they were brought in there by Lebanese priests. They didn't have a mosque, for example, as Al Jalil had. It was a Palestinian organizing this mosque. They didn't have the offices of these different Palestinian groups to socialize them on their cause. They had only the Lebanese to just tell them what they were and what they were not. So they had totally different trajectories. And this is what I expect them to cover in future chapters in the dissertation, to get to the conclusion that, in fact, different ideas of identity and social practices emerge thus both as a result of different models of social organization, socialization, by which these camps were submitted, and to previous cultural, social, diverse traits that they already had. Now, the whole thing is that I just want to demonstrate how that happened in a future chapter. This is like, I just did a lot of the historical part of it, and then now I would go to the more synchronic part of it. So, I just doing that. I just hope that everything that I said on this thing, that was in the call for the talk, that I just gave arguments for us to discuss all these things, right? Okay.
You did it.
I'm sorry that it was boring. It was reading, and it was like I was telling.
But it's so complicated, Leonardo. It's almost impossible to follow. Because there's so many different actors and so on proceeding.
Yeah.
You're trying to make it through, sort of going through some narratives of people who've had experiences and using them as type cases, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. That's what you're trying to get.
Yeah, this would be like just one chapter talking about the early settlement in Lebanon when they first came. Yeah. So then to say how they were socialized in different ways, then to conclude something about why the camps are so different this way, why the identity is different, why social structures, different, why social practices different, even when the discourse is the same, right? This is basically what I want to do. Now, of course, this was just as I'm trying to write the chapter for the writing group that we have in anthropology for Tuesday. You guys had to swallow pretty much when I was preparing for them. So I know it was kind of hard, and I really appreciate that you guys came in here and listened to that, But so the oral history sort of thing is just mainly this first chapter, just to give it a taste of how they got in there. Mm-hmm. You see, and then I'm going to go to another sort of synchronic analysis that's not going to rely. It's going to still rely on histories and everything, the stories and everything, but not on oral history, right? And I still have like a lot to cut in here, and a lot to add on from my notes. So I just chose one or two people telling the story, so you could have more linear narratives instead of making it even more complicated because I'm adding more people to the already confused plethora of social groups that we have in there, right?
Yeah. Yes. I thought India was complicated. Lebanon's more complicated. It's enough to drive you crazy, really. Yeah. Could you say a little more? I would like to know a little more about. Would you mind talking a little bit more about like what the differences really you see, objective differences between the two camps that you kind of
right. No, but first of all, that's the thing. I mean, if you go to Bahia, for example, let me say something. There was this other French researcher. She's from the IFPO, the French Polisai university there, the famous and Jihad's fair, and she went there and she made some oral history of also of the Bayit. And when I was talking to her in Beirut one of the days in my field work, and she had a completely different answer that I got from when I was living in there. So first of all, her name is Sfeir. So the name of the Maronite patriarch is Nasrallah Sfeir. So they would give her the whole Christian discourse, right? No, we're not Palestinians in here. They even told her, where are you seeing a Palestinian in here? Right? And we're not. And as I coming from Al Jalil refugee camp, as they knew it, and this course was completely the opposite. Was that, no, you think that, because they said, no, I want to see what's the difference between one and another. It's like, there's no difference. We're all Palestinians, we're all the same, we're all enduring the same troubles, with the same problems, and, we're never sectarian, so on and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. So what that means somehow is that the Palestinians in the Bayit, they are kind of lost. They are simply left apart by the Palestinian movement themselves, the resistance movement themselves, which they accuse of having Islamized the cause and then alienated them. And of course, the Muslims, they criticize the Palestinians for not being the Palestinian Christians of not being so much engaged in their cause. But then you find examples like, for example, why I brought Anis Saif, because he's a Palestinian Christian himself, Protestant, and he was, for example, for 3 times he was a victim of the Israelis, right? He got one of these letters that glowed in his face. He lost vision, audition, and his fingers, for example. And he's very much engaged in the cause. He was from Al-Bassa. He had close connections with Dwayy and so on and so forth. And even he was kind of criticizing Dwayy's participation on the cause. But Mar Elias, which is the other camp that I brought in here as an example, was totally PFLP, which we know that was, militarily speaking, far more radical than Fatah ever was. All these hijackings that were happening in the 80s, and even suicide bombers and whatever. No, PFLP was there. Now PFLP is together in the rejectionist front with Hamas and Jihad al-Islam and everybody. So how can you say that the Palestinians, the Christians, are not engaged? Some of them are, some of them are not. Why so? I'm explaining by the different way, the different settings, are developed and socialized. How can you create somehow an identity and the social practice that would be engaged towards that political activism and participation in a certain way, or not? The Bayit is not disengaged because it's Christian. It is because of this whole thing, his whole historical thing, that I was just starting to unpack to you. Basically, it's one of the biggest differences that, Bayit is completely disengaged. There's no symbols, there's no Palestinian symbols in there.
That's what
flags, there's no
maps. Can you tell me, now you're making it concrete. That's what I want to hear. What do you, when you go into the camps, like you see, do they look different? Is the street life different? Is there a celebratory cycle that's different?
Yeah, very different. There's nothing of this ihtifalat, plural. There's no muzahara, the manifestations. There's nothing there like this. This temple is not the temple of PLO. It's not the temple of Thawra, as revolution, as they say in Arabic, as is the temple in the other camps.
Right.
So in Dubai, this thing doesn't exist. Though it is part of the temple, it was part of the temple in Mar Elias when Mar Elias was a Christian camp, right? So this is just one example. And again, there's no symbols. And when you go to the Muslim camps in general and Mar Elias nowadays, as it was in the past, you find the territorialization of the camp all the time with the flags, banners for whoever movement it is, or Palestinian flags, or maps, or the keys, to open Quds, to open Jerusalem, as they say, right? You find nothing of that in Bayit for 2 different reasons, basically. One, because it was oppressed. Secondly, because it was oppressed for so many decades, they just gave it up, or they were not socialized anymore to be part of that. They were socializing among the Lebanese community in a different way. They want to be Lebanese. So this is just, some of the differences. Of course, there's many more that I hope to explore whenever I'm writing about it. But they are very visible. And
it's like objective correlatives to your your kind of historical perspective.
Yeah.
I get a question about the use of the term camps. They've been there now 60 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
That's a long time. To be camps. Also, you sort of mentioned Armenians. There have been plenty of displaced people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, camps become something else. The ability not only to maintain it for themselves, but get the international community that here we are in the Gaza refugee camp, and it's a city.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a city. It may be filled with descendants of refugees or refugees themselves, but it's not a camp, even if it started out as a tent. And I'm curious in terms, particularly since you mentioned a group that's interested in becoming more Lebanese, the extent to which they even want to use the term camp, because that seems to be a particularly Palestinian thing. And I'm wondering if at a certain point it only means Palestinians, that it whatever meaning that it had as a camp before, because there's been plenty of refugees during the Lebanese Civil War. Did they deliberately not use the term camp because, that's Palestinians, and we're displaced, we're living in tents even, but, quote, we're not a camp. I'm curious as to
That's
the maintenance of that.
Yeah, well, for example, in the Baye camp, the Christian camp, some people would refer to it as Mukhayam, which is camp. Some people would refer to it as Dea, or village, for example. But those who tended to refer to it as Dea, of course, would be the Lebanese. Those who tend to refer to it as Mukhayam would be Palestinian. So there are many Palestinian refugees in the Bay nowadays who have Lebanese citizenship and who never left the camp. They always had, they never left the camp. So there's many reasons that I want to explore why that happens as well. It has to do with the social bonds and everything. And also with the fact that they don't pay rent in there because it's rented by the UN, so they can always live close to the neighbors and everything. They don't pay any rent, so it seems a great deal. They have their house in there. But some Palestinians, depending on the context, of course they would say, this is the camp, or this is the there. Depending, if you're in front of a Lebanese, for example, in a taxi, and the cab driver is Lebanese, and they would talk about the camp as there. They wouldn't say Mukhayam. But that's not the majority of them, and that's not always. But yeah, that kind of happens with some. Now in Jalil, of course, they would call all the time Mukhayam. That's the thing. Now the second part of your question, if that is just Palestinian, definitely the Armenians will not kind of call them their camps or whatever their areas camps anymore. But that's because they all became Lebanese citizens. And whoever was displaced with the Lebanese Civil War II was Lebanese, but the Palestinians. So the Palestinians, they have no home. They have no right to inherit. They can own houses, but they cannot sell it. They cannot inherit. They cannot do anything with that. So they are not part of the Lebanese social tissue and economic tissue in the same way. So the places that they form, the groups the groupments that they form, the gatherings and the camps, they have to be called in a different way because they're not citizens and they don't feel like that's their place. So if they are still refugees, the place of the refugee is the camp, right? Though you find concrete in there and whatever, there's no tents anymore. It's still, because Mukhayam also comes from Mukhayim, which means tent. Mukhayam is like a collection of tents.
Right.
But still, they would call it in the same way because it's the place of the refugees. That's what it means, in fact. Right?
I'm interested in your use of the comparative method in such a multivariable context, and I wanted to know how you plan to account for isolating certain variables that may be operating more than the others, and how you plan to account for for other variables. So how usually we try to keep some variables at constant, if you will, or somehow account for them in such a way that you can see what's happening with the others.
Yeah.
So how do you plan to approach this complex?
Very nice question too. Yeah, very nice question too. So that's the thing. Though the first chapter introduction that I gave you guys during the it was kind of very much theoretical. I would like to get rid of that as much as I can and just bring that up in the end. So because I don't want to like sort out variables here and there right now, though I have them in my mind, and whenever I build the text that is ethnographical, I'm thinking about how I'm going to be presenting them. I don't want to, get the reader confused right away with the separation of these variables. But though some of them are very clear, like religion, for example, and ethnicity, because at some point it's going to be clear that religion in Lebanon, as in many places in the Middle East, as we know, is played as ethnicity, and that's one of the points that I want to make. Religion is ethnicity, especially in Lebanon, So it doesn't matter if you. That's why even if you switch your religion, let's say there was one case of one lady that I knew in Exiled camp. She was Christian. She went to Sur to marry a Sunni man, and she was Muslim now, but because she had to convert in order to marry, and then so her son can inherit and everything, right? Otherwise, because they don't have also the same rights and duties. Because they are, because of the Lebanese law, if you're a Christian, inheritance, marriage, and all these things are, matters for your own sect, not even Christian sect, but like Armenian or Greek Orthodox or Greek Catholic or whatever, or Maronite. So, in order when you intermarry a different faith, you have to convert to the other faith if you want your son to inherit. Because if you're from a Muslim father and you're as a girl is a Christian, your son is not going to inherit anything. So you got to convert so you can, give these rights and so on and so forth. So, for example, this person, she would still be considered Christian forever. Even if she, maybe her son is not anymore, but she is always she's just a converted, okay, but everyone knows she's Christian. She's ethnically Christian, which of course it seems odd for us, but that's how things operate, But so I'm going to be then isolating some of these variables later on in my conclusions. Like, for example, most of them, the most important ones, of course, are social class, which I talked already in here, how Palestinians were sorted out, like the high class ones stopped being Palestinians, first of all. They tended to, unless they were really engaged in the cause. But all of them, not even the Christians, right when they came in 48, they tended to become Lebanese, right? But especially since the Christians were the most wealthy ones and everything, and had connections with Lebanon, and because of Camille Chamoun's policies towards that, because they wanted to increase the number of Christians, because they were already feeling that they were going to lose the country for the Muslims, then they all got citizenship and the Palestinian Christians disappeared. Only the Fahim stayed, the peasants stayed in the camps, or those who were engaged in the cause. You see, so ethnicity is a very important variable. Social class is another very important variable. Religion, of course, comes out in the interplay between ethnicity and religion. Then you have locality. Now, locality in different parts of Palestine was important to some extent when they chose to where to go. But now what is important is, where are you in Lebanon? And what is this frame doing to you? Now, so locality then is very important because it's really shaping whatever has become of these different groups. And what I intend to show exactly is how locality is the ultimate variable to be explored in here. Because locality is what's going to make people from one or another setting to hierarchize all these variables differently. Like all these other variables like social class, ethnicity, religion, everything. Depending on every place that you are, you're going to hierarchize those differently and you're going to give them different meanings. But that is depending on what setting you are in Lebanon. So this is my main thing. That's why I'm doing also comparative study of the camps. Right?
Good.
Anything else?
He wants to be beat up more. You guys haven't beaten him up enough.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.